Well, one of the state's burgeoning industries has been tourism, which kicks into high gear during the summer. But this year, security concerns are being pushed to the forefront, especially in the wake of the latest terrorist attacks in France and Germany. Now, for more, let's bring in Kamran Bokhari, Senior Fellow with the Center for Global Policy and Fellow with George Washington University's Program on Extremism. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with a look at the impact on terror attacks and what they're doing to tourism globally.
Well, if you have terror attacks and in the kind of volume and geographic spread, particularly focused on Europe, which gets a lot of tourists every year, then obviously people are going to be scared and they're going to be saying, okay, do I really want to go there? This is a very rational fear. This is a very rational response. But, you know, from the point of view of those in the tourism industry, they'd like to say, look, this doesn't happen all the time everywhere. That's a tough sell to people who are going to put money there and want to have a good time. But then it's in the back of their head that, you know, are we going to run into some problem?
And speaking of some of the money, when we're talking about not just people buying a ticket to travel places, they're also the travel-related businesses. In fact, last year, the World Travel and Tourism Council found travelers spent over $2.2 trillion, but their total contribution, when you factor in things like hotel stays, money they spend in restaurants, that jumps up to more than $7 trillion. Now, that figure did dip compared to the previous year. So how much of a role do you think the attacks are playing in the back of people's minds when they're planning their trips now?
I think it's there. It's there, but we also need to keep in mind that a lot of people do understand that it's not like if they go, they're going to get, you know, they're going to come under in the middle of an attack and they'll be wounded or injured, or God forbid, killed. People are cautious, but then there are those people who say, you know what, maybe I won't go to this place, I'll go to another place. But considering that ISIS has attacked from all the way from Indonesia, I mean, let's include Australia, all the way to the United States, people are wondering what is the place to go to in terms of being safe and actually having a good time.
So what can these cities do then? Because they want to advertise that these are safe places, we have these security measures in place, without scaring people off into thinking this is going to be an everyday occurrence. How do they strike that balance?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult because, again, we had an attack today. This is the second attack in Germany in so many days. Small attacks, you know, with an axe, the first one, and this one with an individual with a gun shooting in a mall. So it's a difficult sell that, you know, you say, okay, sure, you know, you're doing your best, yes, security is out there, but attacks are still happening. And that really affects the psychology of people.
Now, we're seeing a lot of these tend to be in soft targets that are easier for people to access. So what are some of the most effective strategies then? Because you want tourists to come to these public places, but then these are also the places that are subject to the attacks.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that we just don't have a good measure just yet of what is the real impact of terrorist attacks, because they're happening, and the fallout from these will be apparent on tourism in the times, weeks and months and years ahead. But right now, the strategy is to show that attacks are not happening, unless from the perspective of the potential tourist, the person who's going to do business or something else, unless they see a sharp decline in attacks or an absence of attacks, then they won't feel safe. If you have attacks, you know, frequently as we are seeing them right now, then it's really difficult to make that case.
Now, with that being said, we also see that the US issues travel warnings to certain countries all the time, and now it's happening in the reverse, with incidents also now starting to pick up in the US. So how much stock do travelers actually take in these warnings? Does it deter them?
They do read them. They do factor them in their plans. In terms of deterring, the question is, you know, from a tourism point of view, if they're deterred, then tourism will suffer. So I know when I travel overseas for work, I do have to look at the State Department warning. I'm from Canada. I have to look at what the Canadian authorities put out. And then, of course, we're consuming news. It's a 24/7 cycle. So all of that does say, okay, you know what, maybe it's not a good idea. But then, you know, I travel around, I still see planes full,
right,
and, you know, hotels are full. So it's not having that massive of an impact. And again, we won't know for some time, because these attacks that we're just seeing right now, their consequences and their impact on tourism will only be apparent, in the future.
Definitely something we'll have to keep an eye on. Thank you so much for joining us, Kamran Bokhari from the Center for Global Policy and George Washington University. Thank you.